She was the quiet new girl in a town that didn't welcome outsiders. But when the school's most powerful bully pushed her too far, he never expected who her father was or what she'd do next. This is the story of how one teenager shattered the silence and brought a high school to a standstill. It started with a glance. Not the kind that slips past unnoticed, but the kind that sticks. The kind that follows you down hallways and creeps into corners, telling you in silent whispers, you don't belong here. 15-year-old Kayla Morgan had only been at Cedar Hollow High for 2 days, and already she knew exactly what kind of place this was. She had seen this story before, different towns, different names, but always the same script. She and her father, Marcus Morgan, had moved from city to city for as long as she could remember, chasing the next promotion, the next department, the next temporary home. But Cedar Hollow, Oregon, hit different. Maybe it was the crisp air or the tidy picket fences lining the neighborhood. Maybe it was how the kids all seemed to come from the same mold, same smiles, same accents, same way they paused just a second too long when they looked at her. Maybe it was because Cedar Hollow was one of those towns where diversity was more a buzzword than a reality. Her father had been appointed the new police chief just 2 weeks ago, and the welcome had been polite. Surface level. Professional handshakes, thin smiles. But Kayla saw it in their eyes, suspicion. Hesitation. Like they were waiting to see if she or her father would make a wrong move. She kept her head down, stuck to the edges of hallways, took her seat in class without a word. She had learned that being invisible was sometimes safer. But it didn't take long for someone to notice her anyway. His name was Bryce Callahan. 17 years old, tall, blonde, perfectly put together in a way that screamed generational wealth and zero consequences. His family name was stitched into half the buildings around town: Callahan Lumber, Callahan Stadium, Callahan Field House. He didn't run the school. He owned it. The teachers looked the other way. The students laughed at his jokes, even when they weren't funny. And now, Bryce had a new hobby, her. It started with whispers as she passed in the hallway. He and his friends, Hunter, Logan, and Reese, would smirk just loud enough for her to hear. "Nice backpack," one would snort. "Did you get that from the clearance bin?" "Careful," another would add, "don't trip over your own silence." The comments didn't even make sense, but that wasn't the point. Kayla said nothing. She had mastered the art of pretending not to hear. But Bryce didn't like to be ignored. It was Friday. The kind of rainy morning that made everything feel slower, heavier. In English class, Mr. Fielding was lecturing about To Kill a Mockingbird, pacing at the front of the room with all the theatrical flair of someone who thought they were teaching Shakespeare. Kayla was scribbling notes quietly when it happened. "Hey, Morgan," Bryce said, his voice slicing across the classroom. She didn't look up. "You ever read this one back where you're from?" She kept writing. Bryce smirked. "Bet your folks relate, huh? All that courtroom drama. Maybe your dad could have helped Tom Robinson get off." His friend stifled laughter. A few students glanced at Kayla, then quickly away. Mr. Fielding hesitated but said nothing. Kayla's grip on her pen tightened. Her heart pounded, but her face gave nothing away. She stared at her notes like they were the most important thing in the world. That only made Bryce bolder. "Maybe she doesn't get it," he added, leaning back in his chair. "Too busy reading urban fiction or whatever it is Mr. Callahan," Mr. Fielding interrupted, finally. "That's enough." Bryce held up his hands in mock surrender. "Just making conversation, sir." Mr. Fielding gave him a weak glare, then turned back to the whiteboard. Kayla breathed out slowly. She had survived worse. But the knot in her chest tightened. The cafeteria was louder than usual that day, Pizza Friday, apparently a big deal in Cedar Hollow. Kayla sat at the far edge of the room, earbuds in, untouched tray in front of her. She could feel the glances. Not just from Bryce and his crew, but from everyone. Curious. Dismissive. She was the police chief's daughter. The black police chief's daughter. That made her interesting, but not in a good way. She had just taken a bite of her sandwich when she felt it. That shift in the air. That presence. She looked up. Bryce stood a few feet away, hands stuffed into the pockets of his varsity jacket, flanked by his usual pack. "You always eat alone?" he asked, like he cared. Kayla didn't answer. Bryce looked down at her tray, then back at his friends. "Guess nobody wants to sit with the new girl." Logan chuckled. "She probably likes being a loner. Makes her mysterious. Or maybe she just doesn't fit in," Bryce added. "Not everyone's meant to be here." Kayla's fingers curled under the table. Still, she didn't move. That quiet strength, that refusal to react, only made him more agitated. He reached forward, grabbed her tray, and flipped it in one swift motion. Food splattered across the tile. Milk pooled on the floor. A hush fell over the room. Someone gasped. Someone laughed. Kayla's sneakers were soaked. Her sandwich ruined. Her face flushed with heat, but she kept her head high. She stood slowly, calmly. Reached for a napkin. Wiped her hands. That was it. Bryce wasn't done. "Where you going?" he asked, stepping into her path. "We're just getting to know each other." "Move," she said, quiet but firm. His smirk flickered. "What was that?" "Move." Logan let out a low whistle. "Girls got an attitude." Bryce stepped closer. "Or what?" And then, click. Heels on tile. A voice slicing through the tension like a blade. "What's going on here?" Assistant Principal Rourke marched toward them, eyes sharp. Bryce straightened up. "Nothing, ma'am. Just a little accident." Rourke looked at the mess on the floor, then at Kayla. "Is that true?" Kayla hesitated. Her throat tightened. She looked around. No one said a word. No one defended her. "Yeah," she said finally. "It was an accident." Bryce grinned. "Told you." Rourke gave him a warning glance. "Clean it up," she said, and walked off. The moment shattered like glass. Bryce and his friends swaggered away. "See you Monday, Morgan," he called over his shoulder. Kayla stood there, sneakers soaked, heart pounding, staring at the mess. She thought of her father's words, "Don't let them see you fold." But what was the point of standing tall when no one cared? That night, the house was too quiet. Kayla kicked off her shoes by the door, still sticky with milk and mashed potatoes, and tried to slip past the kitchen unnoticed. "Kayla?" Her father's voice came from inside. "Yeah." She stepped into the kitchen. Chief Marcus Morgan stood at the counter, still in uniform, coffee mug in hand. He took one look at her and frowned. "What happened?" She hesitated. "Nothing." He didn't blink. "Try again." She dropped into the chair, rubbing her temples. "Some kid knocked my tray over today." "Who?" She paused. "Does it matter?" "Yes." She sighed. "Bryce Callahan." A flicker of recognition in his eyes. "I know the name." "Of course you do," she muttered. "I'm sure the Callahans own half the town." He folded his arms. "And the school?" "Did nothing," she said. "I told them it was an accident." That made his jaw tighten. "Why?" "Because if I told the truth, nothing would have changed." Marcus walked over, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Kayla, when someone does something wrong and we let it go, we're telling them it's okay. We're telling ourselves we deserve it." She looked up at him, frustrated. "You think they'd punish Bryce Callahan for pushing around the black police chief's daughter?" "No," he said. "But I think they're about to find out who they're dealing with." And in that moment, for the first time since she walked into Cedar Hollow High, Kayla believed him. Monday morning didn't feel like the start of a new week. It felt like a storm had passed through overnight, silent but heavy, leaving something different in the air. As Kayla stepped out of her dad's cruiser, the weight of what happened Friday still sat on her shoulders, but there was something else now. A shift. The usual tightness in her chest was still there, but it didn't ache the same way. She adjusted her hoodie, tugged her backpack strap higher, and started toward the school doors. The moment she stepped inside Cedar Hollow High, she felt the whispers. Heads turned faster than they should have, conversations halted mid-sentence, and in those first seconds, Kayla knew something had changed. Not just because of the stairs, but because of what she saw parked out front, a second cruiser. Her father wasn't just dropping her off today. He had stayed. She didn't have to wonder long why. The glass-paneled front office was in full view, and through it, she saw him, Chief Marcus Morgan, standing tall, hands folded calmly in front of him. He wasn't alone. Principal Edwards, upright and stiff. Assistant Principal Rourke, mouth tight, eyes darting toward the window. And then, the Callahans. Bryce's father looked like he stepped out of a glossy business magazine, slick gray suit, perfectly styled hair, a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. His mother sat beside him, legs crossed, fingers tapping her designer handbag. And Bryce, standing behind them, arms folded, jaw tight, pretending he wasn't bothered, but Kayla saw the crack. She didn't stop walking. Didn't press her face to the glass. Didn't need to. Whatever was happening in that room, it was bigger than a spilled tray. Bigger than cafeteria whispers or hallway jokes. This was about respect. And her father wasn't letting it go. She made it to her locker without incident. The stairs followed her, but no one said anything, not today. As she reached for her math textbook, a voice behind her spoke, low and awed. "That's your dad in there?" Kayla turned slowly. A girl from her biology class, Jules, maybe, stood a few lockers down, wide-eyed. Kayla gave a small nod. The girl blinked, opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then just shook her head and walked away. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't cruelty. It was something new. Caution, maybe. Respect. Kayla could live with that. Inside the front office, the temperature might have been a crisp 70 degrees, but it felt like a pressure cooker. Principal Edwards tried to control the meeting, but it was clear from the beginning that Chief Morgan was the one steering it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pound the table. He didn't need to. His words were direct, measured, heavy with authority. "My daughter was publicly harassed, humiliated, and your staff stood by while it happened," he said, locking eyes with Rourke. "Then, when given the chance to address it, you accepted her silence as permission to let it go. You let my child carry the burden of keeping the peace." Bryce's father gave a dry laugh. "With all due respect, Chief Morgan, kids tease each other. It's part of growing up. I'm sure your daughter's tough enough to handle a little cafeteria drama." Marcus's gaze shifted to him. "What you call drama, I call a pattern. What you dismiss as harmless, I recognize as dangerous. Because silence from authority is the foundation bullies build their confidence on." Bryce shifted uncomfortably. His father's jaw tightened. Principal Edwards cleared his throat. "Let's not escalate this. I think we can all agree that Bryce owes Kayla an apology." Marcus didn't blink. "Not because we're asking for it. Because it's the right thing to do." Rourke, clearly uneasy, turned to the Callahans. "Mr. Callahan." There was a long pause. Then Bryce rolled his eyes. "Sorry," he muttered. "Didn't hear that," Marcus said. "Try again." Bryce's voice was louder this time, but hollow. "I'm sorry, okay?" Kayla wasn't in the room to hear it, but the apology wasn't for her. It wasn't meant to be sincere. It was a show, performed under pressure. But even forced apologies have consequences. By third period, the news had made it through every hallway. Someone's older brother had seen Chief Morgan walking out of the office. Another kid claimed his cousin worked in the front desk and overheard everything. Details changed depending on who was telling the story, but the core remained the same: Bryce Callahan got called out. And not just by anyone. By the new chief. The cafeteria, once Bryce's domain, felt different when Kayla walked in for lunch. She moved like always, quiet, steady, but this time, the energy didn't trail behind her. It parted. Like the crowd wasn't sure whether to watch her or look away. Bryce sat at his usual table, but the space around him felt thinner. His friends laughed too loud, like they were trying to prove nothing had changed. But something had. And everyone knew it. Kayla slid into her seat by the wall, earbuds in, lunch in front of her. She kept her eyes down until a shadow moved into her space. Bryce. Alone. You really let your daddy fight your battles for you, huh? He said, his voice low but sharp. Kayla looked up, pulled one earbud out. Excuse me? Bryce leaned in just slightly. You feel big now? Think anyone actually respects you? They're just afraid of what your dad's gonna do. Kayla stared at him for a long moment. Then she stood. Not angrily. Not defensively. Just calm. Steady. You're mad, she said. Bryce blinked. What? You thought you could do whatever you wanted, like always. And for once, someone didn't let you. That's why you're mad. Not because of me, but because you lost control. His face flushed. She stepped closer. And you know what the worst part is? They're not afraid of me. They're not even afraid of my dad. They're afraid of what you showed them on Friday. Which is what? He snapped. Kayla's voice didn't rise. That you're not untouchable. That when the noise clears and people stop laughing, there's nothing behind it. You thought they admired you. But now they see you for what you are. And they don't admire that. They pity it. Bryce opened his mouth, but no words came. His fists clenched, jaw tight. Then he turned, pushed past her, and stormed out of the cafeteria. Kayla didn't move. She stood there, still breathing steady, still calm. She looked around. People weren't laughing. They weren't staring. They were watching, but differently. And for the first time since she arrived, she didn't feel like she was being dissected. She felt like she was being seen. She sat back down, slid her earbuds in, and took a bite of her sandwich. Calm. Powerful. Not because of her father. Not because of a badge. But because she had told the truth, and the truth had done what bullies hate most. It changed everything. By the time the final bell rang, the energy at Cedar Hollow High had shifted into something Kayla had never experienced before. Not here. Not anywhere. It wasn't applause, it wasn't celebration, it was recognition. A silent, collective understanding that something had changed, and not just in the cafeteria. As she gathered her books and stepped into the hallway, the same students who once looked through her now stepped aside, eyes meeting hers for a fraction longer, nods exchanged in the kind of quiet that meant more than words. No pity. No judgment. Just respect. Bryce Callahan was nowhere to be seen. Word had spread that he left early. Some said he was sick, others claimed he just needed space. But Kayla didn't care about the rumors. What mattered was that for once, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel like someone who had to brace herself for impact every time she turned a corner. There was air to breathe again. She moved through the hallways with her head high, her step steady, the noise around her strangely muted. People watched, but not like before. No more giggles behind hands or half-whispered insults. No more smug smiles from Bryce's crew. In fact, they were noticeably silent now, scattered in the lunchroom, drifting like leaves after the wind dies down. Their confidence had walked out with Bryce. As she passed a group near the lockers, one of the girls, Ashley, a cheerleader who used to roll her eyes every time Kayla walked by, actually gave her a short, almost nervous nod. Kayla didn't return it, but she noticed. She noticed everything. She didn't need validation, but it was strange how quickly the tone had changed. Not just toward her, but toward Bryce too. He had built his kingdom on laughter and fear, But fear only holds power if no one questions it. Today, someone had. And it was over. In the silence that followed, Kayla found her voice. The drive home was quiet at first. Chief Morgan's cruiser hummed along the familiar back roads, the Oregon trees casting long shadows in the late afternoon light. Kayla sat in the passenger seat, her backpack resting against her knees, fingers tracing the zipper pull. She hadn't said a word since they got in the car, but her father didn't push. He knew her well enough to wait. Finally, as they turned onto their street, she broke the silence. "He looked at me like he didn't know what to say," she murmured, almost to herself. For once, he didn't have anything to throw back. Marcus glanced at her. "Because you didn't flinch. You didn't give him what he wanted." Kayla nodded slowly. And they saw it. Everyone saw it. He pulled into the driveway and shut off the engine, the click of the gear shift loud in the silence between them. "I want you to understand something," he said, turning to face her. "I didn't go to that school because I thought you couldn't handle it. I went because I needed them to know that disrespecting you doesn't come without consequences. But what you did today, that was all you. You stood on your own." Kayla looked at him, her voice soft but sure. "I wasn't scared this time. Not really. Not like before." "That's not because you weren't scared," Marcus said gently. "It's because you finally saw what was underneath all that noise. The moment someone like Bryce loses his audience, he loses his power. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You broke the illusion." Later that night, Kayla lay on her bed, the room quiet except for the faint sound of wind rustling through the trees outside. Her phone buzzed once, then twice. Messages from people she barely knew. One simply said, "Hey, just wanted to say that was cool, what you did." Another, longer, "I never liked how he treated people. I just didn't know what to say. Wish I had spoken up sooner." She didn't reply to any of them. She didn't need to. It wasn't about revenge or being the new queen of the hallway. It was about peace. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, she felt it. The next morning at school, Kayla walked through the doors the same way she always had, quiet, focused, intentional. But everything else had changed. People moved differently around her. Not out of fear, not out of guilt, but something subtler. Like the temperature had shifted. Even teachers looked at her with something closer to interest than formality. Her English teacher, Mr. Daniels, paused when she turned in her assignment and gave her a small nod. "Good work," he said, voice lower than usual. She sat in the back, as always, but for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to disappear to stay safe. She wasn't a shadow in someone else's story. She was writing her own. At lunch, she sat alone, by choice. A few students hovered nearby, clearly unsure whether they could join her or not. She didn't wave them over. Not because she didn't want company, but because she was still letting herself feel what it meant to be seen. Not just acknowledged, but respected. One table over, Hunter and Logan sat hunched over their phones, avoiding eye contact. Whatever power Bryce had held over them had vanished. Without someone to hide behind, they were just two teenagers eating cold pizza. Kayla looked at them once. Then she turned away. Let it be. That afternoon, while walking to the library, a girl from her chemistry class caught up to her. "Hey," she said, breathless. "Just wanted to say thank you. For Friday." Kayla frowned slightly. "Why are you thanking me?" The girl shifted awkwardly. "Because I was one of the people who laughed. Not just at you. At others too. I thought it was easier to go along with it. But after what you did, I don't know. It made me realize I don't want to be that person." Kayla didn't say anything right away. Then she offered a small, calm reply. "Then don't be." The girl blinked. "That simple?" Kayla nodded. Truth usually is. By the end of the week, Bryce was back in school, but he was a ghost of himself. He kept his head down. Teachers called on him, but the usual cocky banter was gone. His entourage had scattered. Even his jokes, when he tried them, landed flat. People didn't laugh anymore. Because the spell had been broken. Kayla didn't need to see him fall. She didn't gloat. She simply kept moving. Past the lockers, past the lunch tables, past the whispered apologies and awkward silences. What she had done wasn't about tearing someone down. It was about reminding herself, and everyone else, that she was not someone to be walked over. That her silence wasn't weakness. It was strength held in reserve. And when she chose to speak, she didn't need to yell. The truth was loud enough. As she walked out of the school building on Friday, the sun warming the pavement, Marcus was waiting by the car. She opened the door, tossed her bag in, and climbed in with a quiet ease. "How was your week?" he asked. She leaned back in her seat, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Not bad," she said. He glanced over, one brow raised. "Just not bad?" She shrugged. "Let's just say, it's different now." He nodded slowly, pulling away from the curb. "Good different?" She looked out the window at the school fading behind her. "Yeah, I think so." And as the car turned onto the main road, she thought about everything, every whisper, every stare, every time she almost let them make her smaller. She had walked through the fire, not by shouting, not by fighting, but by standing tall in a room full of noise. And that was the moment everything changed. Because once you know your worth, no one, not the loudest voice, not the cruelest joke, not even the most powerful name, can take it from you. Sometimes the loudest thing in a room isn't the shouting. It's the silence. The kind that comes when someone chooses not to speak up, not because they don't have a voice, but because they're waiting for the right moment to use it. Kayla Morgan's story is a reminder of that quiet strength. She didn't fight fire with fire. She didn't scream to be heard. Instead, she stood firm, she spoke the truth, and she let the weight of her words do the rest. That's real courage. In a world that often rewards the loudest voices and the biggest personalities, it's easy to forget the power of calm, steady resolve. But here's the truth: bullies thrive on silence, on the belief that no one will challenge them. And the moment someone does, their power begins to crumble. Not with fists. Not with revenge. But with dignity. If you've ever felt out of place, if you've ever questioned your value because someone made you feel small, know this: your worth isn't up for debate. It doesn't depend on popularity or approval or family names etched on buildings. It's rooted in who you are, in your strength, your kindness, your truth. And the moment you believe that, really believe it, you become unshakable. So if you're listening to this and you're walking through something hard, if you're the quiet one in a loud room, or if you've ever felt like you don't belong, remember Kayla. Remember how she walked through the storm without losing who she was. You don't need to be loud to be strong. You just need to stand tall and know who you are. Because once you do, no one can take that from you. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If it moved you, if it made you think of someone who needs to hear it, please share it. Your support helps us shine a light on real stories of strength, justice, and resilience that so often go untold. This channel exists to uplift voices, especially those that are overlooked or underestimated. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being part of this journey. For showing up. For caring. For believing that truth and integrity still matter. Until next time, stand tall, speak truth, and never forget your worth.